All right, good morning. We're back with a very special guest today, Alex Krainer. Alex has become one of the most important new voices, certainly over the last few years. He has lots of good things to say, and it's a real pleasure to have you join us today, Alex. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure and a privilege. Greetings to all the listeners and viewers.
All right, so you have a hedge fund background. You also currently publish a newsletter, which is for free, as I understand it, at alexkrainer.substack.com. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, good. And I encourage everybody, go sign up for that. Okay, so Alex, the first question I want to ask you is, the world is terribly confusing right now. I mean, we have whatever this COVID hysteria we just came through. We've got insanity in the bond markets. We have the what's happening in Ukraine. We have kind of the social deterioration happening, the mass migration, um, all kinds of things happening right now. How does one make sense of all of this?
I think that the easiest way to make sense of it is to try to take it from the broadest possible context. And I think that the broadest possible context you could give to the situation is what George Soros shared with us in May 2021, I think, at the Davos gathering in Switzerland when he gave his usual annual address to the group. And he said that what we're witnessing is the clash between two systems of governance. And I think that that single jewel of insight explain well helps put everything in perspective. So the way he frames it, he says that it's a clash between open societies and closed societies. And then, he goes and explains that open societies are these wonderful liberal democracies where you have respect for human rights and prosperity and economic opportunity and whatnot. And the closed societies are, Eastern despotism where people live miserable lives of oppression and, where life is cheap. It's not quite like that, but it is a conflict between two systems of governance. I think that the way to frame it truthfully would be that it's a conflict which has gone on for more than 2,000 years, and it's a conflict between the ruling oligarchies in the West and pretty much the rest of humanity. And the ruling oligarchies of the West have given us empires, world wars, the state of permanent warfare, an all-out assault on freedom of speech and other civil liberties. And we feel it on our skin. It's always that system of governance, with maybe some exceptions along the way, have generally tended to create misery at home and mayhem abroad. Roman Empire was a similar deal. They were constantly at war abroad, and they constantly had civil uprisings at home, which were brutally suppressed because people were living in misery. And the root cause of it always draws to the oligarchy, a very narrow, vested system of interest, uh, almost invariably clustered around the moneylender class. And the same was true about the Roman Empire. And this this year, Dr. Michael Hudson published a book titled "The Fall of Antiquity," which I would highly recommend because it shows us the history of ancient Greece and the Roman Empire in a way that makes sense. So it's not just one damn thing after another. Michael Hudson goes back to the root causes of the conflicts at home and conflicts abroad, and basically it's the bankers against the people, and that's the conflict that's been. There's a famous quote by Lord Acton, 150 years ago. He said it, and he said the issue that has swept across the centuries and which will have to be fought sooner or later is people versus the banks.
Hmm.
And this is exactly what we have today. And I think it's defining the process of globalization, of spreading of the Western Empire across the globe. And also, it's also defining the myriad divide and rule mm, gambits that are being thrown to the domestic populations. Black Lives Matter, black versus white, liberals versus conservatives, women versus men, and so on and so forth. So I think this is the ultimate cause behind all the chaos.
Are are people just trapped in the middle of this of these two opposing forces? Is the other force of like one that we should support? I mean, should we like because I've seen people set this up before and think, well, the West paints, of course, Russia as the Putin's the ultimate boogeyman in my mind, and then I see a lot of my wife's Chinese, well, she's American, but of Chinese heritage. Um, and her parents grew up during the Cultural Revolution. So I've heard the stories and they're crazy, heart wrenching in many ways. But, I have a different view, I guess, on China than most of the people that I've known through my life. It's not exactly as it's spun. So it seems like maybe it's kind of being positioned in the same way that they're being cast in a bad way, like the Putin is. But I wonder, is that the good side? Are they pro-human? I mean, pro on our side? Is Putin pro-human, or is it two bad groups essentially that are coming to the clash, as Soros says? Well, he doesn't say
Yeah.
bad, but
Okay. So I think that here one has to be very open minded, and I can share with you what my conviction is, and I've arrived at my conviction through a lot of research, and my conviction is that actually Russia and China are the good side.
mm, wow.
And I know that some people might find this difficult to believe, but um, you know, when we consider history, several things emerge. First, the Western civilization and the Western Empire has been one of the most pathogenic empires ever. So we have, over the last 500 years, the Western empires, because it includes French and Spanish and British empires and the Dutch Empire, we have wiped out six major indigenous civilizations around the world. And we have wiped out literally thousands of minor kingdoms and cultures and tribes. And we have depopulated massive swathes of the world. The indigenous populations of the Australasia, um, South Southeast Asia, South America, North America, have been wiped out to the tune of 90% or more. Uh, Slavery has been for several centuries a major industry, where people were just simply taken by force from uh, Africa or other places and taken to the Caribbean and to South America and to North America to work mines and plantations for, Western colonialists. Uh, if we contrast this to the history of China and Russia, they've never done anything close to that. So, we did have Russian Empire, but it was a different thing. And China has been a major power for several millennia, but they, apart from a short period when they were ran by Mughal dynasties, they never went around the world invading other nations, and they never colonized any part of the world. There is a cultural difference.
Mm.
And so I think that we have to be open-minded to the possibility that they are actually the good side in this. And if they stay true to their cultures, Russia being, rooted in their Orthodox Christianity, and China staying faithful to their, Confucian roots and traditions, then I think that all this fear mongering against Russia and China is probably not justified. And there's another reason why I very much doubt all this fear mongering. Uh, the Western oligarchy is in a massive bit of trouble. And what the banking oligarchies have done for millennia, when the social pressures at home came to a boiling point, is they would invent the enemies at the gate. And they would start spreading fear and panic in the local population, in the domestic population. And, to the extent that people believe them, and that people believe that maybe, these foreign invaders were going to come and raid their homes and, kill their wives and pets and children and raise their villages. Well, then, it's time for real men to go and defend the home turf, right? So that would mop up exactly the segment of the population that was most dangerous to the oligarchy, the fighting age men. the patriotic fighting age men. So what would be the greatest gift, the greatest Christmas present that the current oligarchies in the West could have to preserve their power? It would be if we all went to war against Russia or China. And if we all, believed that, you know, China's going to invade the United States, China's going to do this or that. First of all, there's no reason to believe that China has any intention to do any harm to the United States, to the ordinary people in the United States. Second, if China had ambitions to expand their territory, to conquer new lands, the Lebensraum, why of all countries would they attack the United States? Wouldn't it be so much easier to invade, say, Australia or New Zealand or Canada, which are much less well defended and where there's no Second Amendment, there wouldn't be a gun around every trash can. Why would they, of all places, go and invade the United States? It's just loopy. I have a hard time buying it, but I understand why um, the powers that be would like us all to be afraid of China and Russia. And I think if we fell into that trap again, we would give them the best Christmas gift they could ever hope for. And which is another reason why we should be very, very judicious and very careful about who we hate and where we target our grievances and our anger.
These are very interesting points you make, Alex, that most people won't have heard. I'm sure that a lot of our listeners, when they heard you mention George Soros to start with, were shocked. I'm not a fan of Soros from what I know about him. Simply the fact he hangs out with these horrible people in Davos who seem to want to control the world. But, you know, I think that maybe kind of you're conflating Western civilization with the fact that these oligarchs happen to be in the West right now. Because what do you think about this? The way I see it, of all the civilizations in the world, the Western civilization is the only one that really amounts to a hill of beans. And I'll tell you why I say that. I thought about this a while ago, and there are 12 characteristics of Western civilization that are basically unique to it. You see, people agree that they're unique to it and that they're good things. And I have a list here because I can't remember. I can't remember more than three things. Two, three, many. So, let me read them. First is free thought. That's certainly an active Western value that they don't have anywhere else in the world. Free speech. That's certainly unique to the West, theoretically. Free markets. I mean, everybody's had trading and all this type of thing, but free markets as an actual value. Limited government. We don't have that anymore, but it's a Western idea. Number 5 is individualism, as opposed to the group and collectivism. And I come down on the side of individualism, which is a Western value. 6 is rationality. It's science, logic. These things arose in the West. 7 is the idea of individual liberty, which is, once again, this is a concept that they didn't have except in the West, starting with the Greeks, but then starting with the Renaissance more. The concept of progress, that's also unique to the West. 9 is the idea of privacy, the idea that your business is yours. It's not your neighbors, or it's not the emperors or the kings or this type of thing. Property rights, the rule of law, industry and entrepreneurialism, and freedom of movement. Anyway, these are all Western concepts. So that I don't think you can paint, just because we have these horrible people that are running things in the West right now, I think they're destroying the concepts of Western civilization. So I don't think you can conflate them. You know what I'm getting at.
Doug, you're quite right, and I think I used the term Western civilization by mistake. I meant to say the Western Empire. So I would definitely draw a line between the empire and the civilization. And when I say empire, I want to clarify: the empire is never a national thing. Empires are always the empires are like parasites on an in school, in history, the way they taught us history, empires were always conflated with nations. So we had the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire and the French Empire and British and Spanish and so forth. But it's never, like it doesn't really have to do anything with the nation. It's basically a system of vested interest that taking a nation as a host. It's a parasite that takes the nation as a host. It infiltrates its system of power, and then it uses that nation's wealth and military might and diplomatic and political power to basically spread the empire for the benefit of those very narrow vested interests, which are always the banking interests, because the interest in spreading the empire is to acquire collateral. Because, when you have this, this money lending practice that's, like you lend money with interest, you're always creating a Ponzi scheme that's stable only for as long as it grows. And you can't be limited to one nation, because at some point you're going to saturate the market. People will come to the capacity to service more debts, and you will not be able to grow it any further.
Doesn't that have its origin though with central banks? And in a free market economy, there are borrowers and there are lenders, and it should benefit both of them. But if you have central banks, then what you're saying is completely true. I think only
Well, no, it doesn't originate with central banks because we had the same phenomenon in ancient Greece starting like 8th century BC. And the Roman Empire was basically that. The whole business was oligarchy running amok. And we also had the same process during the 12th and 13th century Italy with the Lombard banking period. And from there, the first central bank was the Bank of Amsterdam. So some people say that the Venetian bank was the first central bank, and it did have certain attributes of a central banking institution, but it evolved from there. And then those same bankers, migrated to Amsterdam, where they set up the Bank of Amsterdam, which was perhaps the first true central bank. And then, the Dutch Empire basically invaded England. That was the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And in 1694, they set up the Bank of England. And that's the first real true central bank. It didn't have the monopoly yet until, I think, 1825 or something like that. But it was the beginning of central banking. But nevertheless, the abuses of the money lending class, which were, not small, because, here's what happens when you lend money with interest, especially in situations where you're using, sound money, let's say, not gold backed money, but actually gold and silver coins for transactions. You only have a certain amount of money in circulation. And now if somebody starts lending money to increase the purchasing power in the system, and people have to repay that money with interest, what happens in the process is that you end up sucking away the purchasing power. You end up reducing the amount of money in circulation in the economy. And, if you're using gold and silver coins, you don't even have a theoretical possibility of, printing up fiat to, maintain the economic activity and the purchasing power in the system. And so what you do is you create very sharp wealth polarization. So people who lend money and then get paid back end up drawing away wealth from the community, the purchasing power flounders, and the economic activity drops into a depression. So always, for thousands of years, these systems have created misery at home.
Those are great points, especially when you mention using real money, gold and silver coins. But how about this? If lending money and borrowing is dangerous, they're both dangerous, maybe things changed a lot, or should have changed a lot, with an industrial economy, because in previous economies, the amount of real wealth in the world very, very, very slowly. But since the dawn of the 19th century, anyway, industrial economy allowed wealth to compound greatly. So maybe lending isn't so bad these days with wealth compounding greatly.
Well, I think that, lending money is not necessarily an evil thing, depending on who you allocate it to, for what purpose, and what the money represents. And okay, so let's go back to basis, because this is not easy to understand. But okay, so let's go back to where, humanity was, a bunch of nomadic tribes moving across the earth, going to where there was food and water. And in those conditions, it basically took the pretty much the whole of the community, the whole of the tribe or clan, whatever, to to generate enough sustenance for the group. And I read somewhere that basically in a nomadic tribe, it takes the labor of 21 members of the tribe to sustain 23 members of the tribe. It's in Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, and he must have got it from somewhere. He was a university professor. So let's say that that's broadly correct. So what that means is that pretty much everybody has to participate in sustaining the population. Okay, so now when people settle down and we invent agriculture, uh, we start to generate a surplus. We start to grow. We have animal husbandry, we have staple crops, and we get a lot more than we need. Actually, we need to start figuring out how to store the surplus. Tribes invent things like potluck, where you just have a big bash every year and you just eat all the food, or you create these parties where people throw tomatoes at each other and pour rivers of wine down the streets because it just has to go. It's too much. But what happens at that point is, because there's a surplus, not everybody has to work to produce that sustenance. So now you have surplus of labor. And now you can divert some of that labor to create social capital. Let's say maybe the community decides to build a bridge across the river. And maybe by creating that bridge across the river, they open new markets, or they enable their own community to cultivate the fields across that river. And that maybe generates even more surplus. So now they're even wealthier. Well, uh, when the community decides to make an investment of the surplus that they have, surplus of foodstuffs and surplus of labor, to grow their wealth, then they allocate credit. Let's say, like I put together a squad of men and we decide to go build that bridge. And the community gives us credit. They say like, okay, so you'll be entitled to having so many bags of rice and butter and milk and eggs and, whatever. So now let's say we get some tokens uh, for our families to have sustenance while we're building the bridge. And those tokens could be money. We go to the warehouse, we get our stuff. So that money and that credit that we obtain comes from the real social capital of our community. It's a real surplus. We have that wealth, and we can invest that wealth in whatever the community decides to build next. It can be a bridge, it can be a school, it can be a pyramid, whatever. But let's say that the decision was taken legitimately within the community on the basis of that community's wants and desires and needs, right? So the decision was taken by the people who created that wealth, and the investment was made from out of the social surplus, from out of the wealth that we already created. Okay, so that's one way. Now, if you introduce the banker into the picture, and those tokens, that money, they just conjure it out of thin air, and they, at their discretion, decide how that wealth is going to be invested into what kind of uses. Well, then the banker might say, like, I think the best way to do invest money will be to maybe fund a standing army, and then we're going to invade the next village. And why do all this work when we can just take it from the next village? And then, the question is whether that credit represents the real actual wealth, or is it counterfeit wealth? Did they just print it out of thin air to mobilize the local population to carry water for them for the purposes that they decided were desirable, not the community? So, one way, which I think is good and healthy, is using the wealth that we create to invest towards things that we desire. And in that world, we would have high quality foods, we would have safe streets, beautiful, parks and hospitals and schools and museums and philharmonics and operas and all of those things and marble statues everywhere around. Whereas under this other system of governance, what you get is proclaimed values, but are they true? You mentioned the 12 values that are, upheld by the Western civilizations, and they're all great values. The question is whether they're true. First one is the freedom of speech. I published a book in 2017, which was banned within 5 weeks by the order of a swamp creature from out of the U.S. State Department. They just wrote a letter to Amazon, and Amazon disappeared the book, no questions asked. So you have the right of free speech, provided that you don't say things that they don't want you to say. And like we see that Alex Jones is gone, Tucker Carlson is gone. They're defunding, deplatforming people left and right. So freedom of speech is a facade, but it's not true beyond the facade.
No, you're absolutely right. Because Western civilization has become degenerate and degraded, and it's lost its values, it's lost its ways. And that's why when you said earlier that you support China and Russia, I'm sympathetic with that because, for instance, in this ridiculous fight in the Ukraine, frankly, you have to be on the Russian side when you look at everything. I know both of them are crazy, but actually the most dangerous thing in the world today by far is the US government, which is completely out of control, and the society is completely over financialized, which you've been talking about. Absolutely. That's all true. What are we going to do about it, Alex? What should we do at this point as a society, and perhaps more important, as individuals?
Okay, so I'll get to that, but I'd also like to get back to the question of Russia and China. And I just want to, share with you where I'm coming from. I'm not a Russophile by any stretch of the imagination. I was born in Croatia. I'm a Catholic. Croatian culture is maybe not as rabidly Russophobic as maybe Polish culture, but it is, it is Russophobic. And throughout my life, I never questioned it. So, I had never any interest in Russian affairs. I remember that when Vladimir Putin came to power, I I never doubted the Western narrative about the man. I thought he was the embodiment of evil on earth. It's just that, through my work and through some contacts, I started, you know, learning stuff and information that I thought, well, that's very strange. That doesn't seem to add up with what I thought I knew. And then ultimately, I started doing a lot of research, and I realized that we're being lied to. But I mean, lied to in a very brazen way. The reality is very close to opposite from what we're being told. And so, anyway, what do we do as individual and as individuals and as collective? I think that we have to. Um, I think we have to figure out the operating system of our societies. I think that we have to. One of the key things that we have to figure out is the magic of money and credit. Because this is where society can develop in the best way possible, maybe beyond what we can even imagine. Uh, you know, to everybody's benefit, prosperity, happiness, enjoyment, and so forth. We are on this earth. We are capable of feeling happiness and joy. Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't it be everyday existence for everyone? On the other hand, we can also sleepwalk into this state of permanent warfare. And, you know, uh, even in the West, which is supposedly prosperous, most people struggle, and, the old observations of how in the 1960s and 1970s, one blue collar job could sustain a family comfortably. Today, 2 white-collar jobs cannot even make ends meet. I hear more and more people complaining about this in a real way, like real stories of people who, like have professional jobs, but can barely afford to pay their rent and their utilities. And there's barely anything left for discretionary spending. They,
We do too. And because you live in Europe now,
yeah.
and it's the same thing there as it is in the United States, I would think, what you're saying.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, like I grew up in the socialist world of, former Yugoslavia. We had one party communist rule. Uh, and then in 1991, we became a free, a liberal democracy. We copy pasted the Western system practically word for word from the European Union and from Germany, the same laws, regulations, and rules. And we got a stock market and Western banks and, Western supermarkets and everything. And, people are a lot more poor. There's a lot more. We never used to have homelessness. Never. Uh, uh, there were poor people, but not destitute. It's gotten very bad. It's gotten much, much worse. Uh, a lot of social infrastructures has deteriorated as well. Like the water supply, the trash, the post office. We used to in the socialist Yugoslavia, we had a post office that was absolutely amazing. The postal system worked flawlessly. You would get practically overnight delivery from any village to any village. It was quite amazing. It worked really well. Well, today, mail going from a major city to a major city taking 3 months or not even ever being delivered, getting lost is now a regular story that people share between themselves. So, my point is that, we can be tremendously productive. We are in fact tremendously productive. We generate an enormous amount of wealth and an enormous abundance. Something is wrong if most people struggle amidst all this abundance. Somehow it's being sucked away from us. And I think it's not even disputable anymore that the dark secret is in the monetary system. And so I think we have to reform the monetary system. We have to have honest money. We have to have, credit allocation that corresponds to the needs and desires of communities. So that, that we invest in things that we want rather than investing in things like, vaccine passports and
Yeah, Alex, there's
if
one example of this that's really obvious is that when you say that the banking intermediary could then choose to allocate the capital in a way that doesn't serve the interest of the community, I think you have to look at all this ESG and DEI stuff as a perfect example of that. By them being an intermediary, they've made this the agenda with no one interested in it.
exactly. Yeah. Nobody asked for we're dimming the sun.
No.
No. So we're getting, somehow we're getting a lot of things we don't want and positively hate, like, permanent war and increasingly aggressive oppression at home, lockdowns, all this nonsense. And for some reason, we can never get things that we do want. Safe streets, good quality education, uh, good quality, abundant food that's available to everybody, good housing, safe street, good hospital and healthcare. All of those good things are somehow slipping away while there's like a tsunami of things that we don't want that are being, we're being inundated with. So obviously something is wrong. And, like if you wanted a definition of unsustainable, all you have to do is plot the chart of the monetary base in the United States and the total credit, total, what is it called? Total credit market debt. They changed the name. Now it's called all sector something something. But if you go to Federal Reserve's Fred page, where they have all these aggregates and all the data, you can plot on the same chart the total credit market debt, which today arrives at, I think, about $91 trillion. So that's a federal, state, local debt and all the private debt, right? Corporate, all the debts that are in the system altogether. And then the monetary base is the money that's available for repayments of this debt. And there's 19 times more debt than money to pay it back with. And now if you're if you're Paul Krugman, then you would say like, oh, well, wait a minute, debt is only money we all owe to ourselves. And much of this debt doesn't have to be paid this year, so it can be paid in. But the problem is that the only way for the money curve to go up, the monetary base to go up, is for the total credit market debt to go up even more. The curves, by definition, by the way the monetary system is set up, those two curves can never converge. They only diverge with time wider and wider and wider.
No, you're absolutely right. And of course, Krugman is a real bête noire. I mean, this guy this guy's actually a criminal. It's amazing. People like him and Thomas Friedman that has widespread audience belief in that. But in your investment activities, I know that the system that you've developed is one of following trends. And these are very negative trends that you've been talking about that have been building. So where is this going to end? Where is this going to end for the society? And where is it going to end for the markets that we are in trying to preserve our wealth? Those two questions. It sounds like you're looking for either a runaway inflation or a credit collapse from a monetary point of view.
Yeah, Doug, that's exactly correct. So there are two ways to end this. There are two ways out of this. Well, there are two ways to deleverage the system and to precipitate the debt bubble, and that is, either through a deflationary death spiral. If you start curtailing credit, and then everything collapses. Liquidity dries out from the system, and everything collapses, and then you have something like the 1930s depression. And during the 1930s depression, the S&P 500 went into a bear market that I think it lost 86% peak to trough, and it took 26 years for it to recover, to come back to the 1929 level. And the other possibility is where you use the central bank to issue credit out of thin air, and you use that credit to backstop all the bad losses that are on the bank's books. So all the, all the unpayable debts of the zombie corporations and of, other participants in the economy that are now literally unpayable, you backstop them with printed up fiat. And so that gives the system more maneuvering space, and it delays the reckoning, but at the expense of the currency. So you're going to trigger an acceleration of inflation, which could, turn into hyperinflation, and you're going to wreck the currency. And in that way, everybody's going to pay for, those unpayable debts through, losing their savings, losing, whoever's living on fixed income is going to end up in a heap of trouble. And so those are the two ways. The third way, which exists, but it will never be applied, is a debt jubilee. If you wrote off all the debts, you say like, okay, this is unpayable, so we're going to write it off and basically forgive it, which is what used to be done in antiquity before the Greeks. All the Middle Eastern kingdoms, every time there was a new king being crowned to rule, they would proclaim a jubilee, and all the debts would be annulled. And then the society would start, the credit impulse from scratch, and the large creditors would end up screwed, but the population at large would be relieved, and the prosperity of the economy would be restored. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I see that. Of course, that's problematical because uh, the people that accumulate the capital to lend it out tend to be harder working and more prudent and producing more than they consume and saving the difference so they can lend it out. There are problems with that. There's problems with all that. The standard of living, I think, has got to collapse just generally, no matter which of these scenarios happens. But what do you see an individual should do to make sure that he's not hurt too badly in the next few years?
Well, okay. So first of all, I think that we should put things into perspective. We we are obviously heading into a crisis, but it's not going to be the first or the last crisis that humanity has gone through. If you try to put yourself into 1918, at the end of World War I, what the world looked like at that point, I think that where we are now can still be categorized as a walk in the park. So, we're in a bad shape, but it's not, it's not like we're all going to die tomorrow or next year. So we're going to be fine. I think that people individually should do a number of things. First of all, I think they should seek to put some resilience um, into their lives in the financial sense. One thing you want to do is you want to scale back your overhead. You don't want to be living in a sprawling mansion if you can afford to live in a 2-bedroom house. So that's one thing that's good to do. Second thing, if you can acquire some gold and silver in small denominations, physical, and have it on you or somewhere where you can access it, not necessarily banks or bank vaults, because we've seen that bank vaults can be broken into by the FBI if they choose to do so. So it's not exactly super safe. But I think that that's one of the good things that people should do, to have at least enough to cover 6 months to a year worth of their expenses, at least a few months, because like when crises get really, really bad, it's usually not for a very long time. It's usually several months that are critical, and then things start slowly improving, and you get some maneuvering space. You get some wiggle room. If whoever can should try to have at least a small bit of land that they can use for to grow their own food. And I think that perhaps the most important thing for people to do is to reach out to their local communities and to cultivate bonds of confidence and trust and mutual support. I think that's by far the most powerful thing that can render them resilient through a crisis that is ahead of us.
What are the chances that the U.S. is going to turn into a police state? And for that matter, the EU turn into a police state?
I think the chances of EU turning into a police state are a lot higher than the United States. I think that the United States is still a much more robust democracy than Europe is. You still have state powers in the United States. Local counties in the United States still elect their sheriffs, and those sheriffs are accountable to their local communities. And the federal government is trying to overcome that with the creation of this 80,000 strong IRS force, which is just a backdoor federal police force that they're going to try to foist on the Americans. But then, you also have the Bill of Rights that many Americans do understand that they have. Many don't, but many do. You have the Second Amendment. So the American people have they're armed. That's not nothing. And American people have a certain attachment to the idea of liberty, which in Europe, I live here. I don't find it in the same way at all here. People do tend to defer to their government more. That's my perception. I could be wrong. At any rate, I think that um, I'm let's say that I'm reassured about the United States. I'm sure that the American people at a given moment are going to know to defend their freedoms, and they will probably do so successfully. Europe is going to be a little bit different, but we will have populist movements here. So like the big mothership of oppression, which is the European Community, the EC and the European Commission and that whole supernatural infrastructure, that's probably going to collapse. And then our local national governments are going to maybe make better use of their sovereignty, and people, there is a degree of political awakening among the people that is very, very different from anything I've ever seen. And I think it's because we have internet. We literally 20, 30 years ago, we depended on newspapers and television and radio for information. And so, maintaining the official narrative was a lot easier than it is today. Today, most of the people get their news from social media. Social media are very difficult to control, and they're not being able to control it fully. And so people are a lot more aware about what's going on than I think at any point in history. And I think that with every passing day, the tide is going in favor of liberty, because I think that when people awaken, they don't one day say, "Oh, I think I really like the EU and World Economic Forum, and I quite like that Klaus Schwab guy and his ideas. So I think we should do more of that." No, it's always the opposite. People, when they awaken, when they start understanding what's going on, they want sovereignty, they want liberty, they want, they're not interested in participating in this whole nonsense of turning us all into a termite colony. So I'm genuinely optimistic, but I'm slightly more optimistic for the United States than I am for Europe. And I think that one thing that will very probably happen as soon as the Biden administration is out of the White House is that we're going to see, for the third time in history, or fourth time, depending on how you define it, for the third time in history, you will see the renewal of the alliance between the United States and Russia. What most people don't understand is that Russia is a natural ally to the United States. Russia and the United States had a very close friendship and alliance throughout the 19th century. Russia played a pivotal role during the US Civil War and helped preserve the Union, which was being attacked by Britain and France. And I think that the logic of this conflict that, George Soros suggested between two systems of governance makes the United States and Russia natural allies. And I think that that alliance is going to happen. I don't know when, but I think that the main obstacle now are the neocons and the Biden administration. So if by any chance Donald Trump gets into the White House once more, I think this could become a reality again.
It would be nice to avoid a nuclear war.
Yeah, that would be really nice.
Yeah. That'd be helpful. I have to ask you about the Great Taking, because we discussed that on our channel. I know you read it. It circulated amongst friends. I know you got a copy. You read it, and you later spoke with David Webb about it. And you had a take on it that is, because when you read it, you're like, the jig is up. In terms of any financial asset. But you have a view on it that's a bit different, and I think it's really important for people to hear that. So could you share that with us?
So, first of all, David Webb's book is excellent and I highly recommend it. It's available free online, and it's not long and it's very well written. So it's easy to write. It's like 100 pages. The whole document is 130 pages, but it's like the index and table of contents. The text itself is 100 pages. You can plow through it in just a couple of hours. And it's very well written, and it's very important because it shows definitely that there was an intent by this financial oligarchy that's in power in the West, had clearly intention to basically plunder all the collateral in the system of our Western economies from people's accounts and stock ownership of stocks and bonds, to just basically expropriate everybody and hoard all of that collateral to themselves. And they've actually prepared the infrastructure, the conveyor belt for that financial heist for like 5 decades. You couldn't randomly do that. You had to have an intent. And it's a complex undertaking that took, they had to gradually change the plumbing of the financial system, the legal framework of the financial system. And they have done all that. Now, they got us all in, but my question is, will they dare to slam the trapdoors shut on us? The world has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I think that when they were when they were creating this conveyor belt or this giant vacuum cleaner that was just going to suck up all the wealth from all of us to them, um, I think that they conceived the idea in different circumstances. There was a unipolar moment. They didn't expect that they were going to have geopolitical rivals in Russia and China 20 years later. They didn't, like a lot of things happen that they don't have quite as secure a political hold on power, even in the West, and they've completely lost it in other nations. The problem is that, let's say you created this system where you could just expropriate the wealth of all of Americans, take all of their 401 accounts, the brokerage accounts, take it all. Well, the problem is that there's about an estimated $32 trillion worth of US denominated assets owned by foreigners. And some of those foreigners are, the government of Japan and the government of China, rivals and allies. You would inevitably piss off a whole lot of people, and many of them very powerful. Your international alliances would collapse from one day to the next. And you would create a complete economic depression all at once because people would lose purchasing power. So, what would the shops be able to sell? The car companies, the bicycle repairman, who, nobody would have any business. The society would almost instantly collapse into an economic depression. And so I think that you could only pull this off if you were 100% confident about your hold on political power and on, enforcement, your hold over the military and the police. And then maybe you might say like, yeah, let's pull it off. Let's do it. Like this, I very much doubt that they will dare, because they also have the option of printing the fiat to infinity. And, that will trigger inflation, but inflation is a process that can span 10 or 15 years. And during those 10 and 15 years, you can, you give yourself maneuvering space to try this and that and to try to manage the crisis in a way that least adverse to your interests.
I think
So
you
this is
brought up,
why, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Alex, didn't you bring up, I thought this was an excellent way for them to conduct theft where people would like the idea of the theft. It's if the stock market collapses, everybody's going to look to the central bank to help it. Help us. So the central bank this time will go out and buy lots, billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of shares, and it'll own the shares. And that's the way they'll do it. How about that? I think you came up with that idea.
Well, I think that that's illegal in the United States. They're not allowed to directly buy shares or bonds, but they
They violated it during COVID though, when they
yeah,
started
that's
buying.
right. So they've worked out loopholes and workarounds. And so they violate those, not the letter, but the spirit of those laws. And we saw that, during this last stock market rally, the biggest stock market buyer in the United States was the Bank of Japan. How interesting is that?
Mm.
So the Federal Reserve gives this massive swap line to the Bank of Japan. And they say like, well, here's all this money. Please keep buying stocks for us so that we can keep the asset prices high. So yeah, they cheat. They probably will continue to cheat, but they definitely have this option of, uh, you know, inflating the money supply and using that money supply to keep the asset prices from collapsing. And they will probably keep doing this. The problem is that ultimately that will, end up eroding the dollar's purchasing power. And they already have 100-year track record of doing that. So we shouldn't, we shouldn't put it past them because, since the Federal Reserve was created, the dollar lost something like 99.5% of its purchasing power. So, what's another 99%?
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so the fundamental thing is that they have this rug pull opportunity. It's still there. It's like a dead man switch in a system, but
Yes.
why be so kinetic about your crime if you can do it covertly, right? Why be so overt when cause chaos that could go in ways you can't imagine?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the problem that, they, they can't pull the rug. They set everything up to be able to do it. but they are running risks that are unpredictable. You know, like they themselves, I think, could not predict. Yeah, you'd piss off a lot of military generals as well, wouldn't you? You know,
Yeah.
the police force have their, pensions in
Pension.
401k accounts and in stock market. You would turn a lot of people against yourself very quickly. And, I think that today, um, it would not be possible to keep that like keep the information about this from the public. The story would spread, people would know. And, I think that you would lose hold on political power, and then you could end up, tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail.
Oh,
Yeah.
better yet, I think that the Italians set the right tone with Mussolini.
Wait, I think that was too easy. My personal favorite would be to give them exactly what they had in mind for us. You will own nothing and be happy. So I would be in favor of complete 100% expropriation of all family assets, no hiding behind wifey's trust fund, and a lifetime imprisonment, and probably a diet of crickets and other insects.
Mealworms, yeah.
Yeah, and quarterly booster shots.
I love it. I love it. We've gone a little long, Alex, but I actually only got probably 3 questions into my list for you. So hopefully you'll come back again. We can talk some more.
Yeah, with pleasure, of course.
Okay, that'd be great. And everybody definitely go to Alex's Substack. It's fantastic. I highly encourage it. You will not regret it. So Alex, once again, thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
It really was.
Thank you, Matt. Doug, it was an honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.